What's up, everybody? Welcome to another week of the Biblia Boys, the Bible Boys, with me, James, and you,
Pip.
We're back for another week, ready to get into the Bible, as we do almost every week. We have breaks every now and then, but you know what? I don't know when our next break is on the horizon. Why stop what's going so well right now?
As Thomas the Tank Engine once said, you don't stop a good train when it's rolling.
That's right. And then Percy, his, other friend, the train, went toot toot.
No, 100%. Now, James, I want to ask you, last week you said that you had a sermon that you preached on Sunday. Now that it's come and gone, I want to ask, you made the goal that you'd talk for 25 minutes.
Yes.
And no less than 25, no more than 25 minutes. And other people were trying to hold you accountable to that. How'd you go with that?
I failed in keeping it at 25 minutes. I got to 25 minutes and 28 seconds.
Oh, okay. So, 28 seconds. That's okay. That's within the margin of error, I'd say.
Is there? You know how, like, with essays, you got a plus minus 10%? Is
so.
there? Well, what is it for sermons?
5%, or plus minus 5% of the time. So 5% of 25 is
Yes.
hold on, I got this. It's 1/20th, so it'd be 1.2. Is that correct?
Yes.
1.2 of whatever. So you would have had. You would have had here. Okay, here it is.
Wait. 1.2. What do you
Yeah.
mean? Sorry, I just said yes. What do you mean by 1.2?
So what I'm saying is 5% of 25
Yes.
is 1.2. No, that doesn't make sense. Hold on. Let's bring it back. 5% of 25. Yes, it is 1.2. Is it not? Am I wrong?
I'll be honest with you, I'm so amused by your facial expression right now. I have not even bothered to do the calculation in my head.
Let's just assume it is 1.2 for a second.
Yeah, sure.
And let's say when we say 0.2, we're talking in terms of, you got to convert that into minutes and seconds, right?
Yeah.
So 0.2 of a minute is obviously
Alright. 5%, Pip. I just did the calculation.
12 seconds. No, you go.
Okay, I'm totally gonna botch this on air. It's 1 minute 15 seconds, isn't it? Isn't that 5% of
12
25?
seconds. 12 seconds is 5% of a minute.
No, it's 1/5 of a minute. So that's 20%.
Now, I'm no Einstein, but I think that should be... let me just stress that to our listeners, okay? I'm not Einstein, and so these calculations might be a little bit off, okay? But the point of it is this, James, you were within the margin of error. You didn't go... If you were 26 minutes or 27 minutes, not so good, but...
Yes. You're very kind, and that's the main point, yes. But... No, thank you. You're very kind. So now, 25 minutes, 28 seconds. I think the 28 seconds was also because I went off script at some points. Because, you're there, you say something, you go, there's something I can add here, a little flourish, a little line here, a little extra repetition.
Now,
yes.
Let me just ask this. You do Q&A at St. Paul's, right?
Yes.
How long did your Q&A go for?
We did it in... we had morning church in Orthodox. We had afternoon church, we had night church. I didn't time how long they went, but I think that the afternoon church Q&A went the longest.
Okay. Cool. Well, good. How do you feel the sermon went? How do you evaluate, what's normally your feeling right after giving a sermon, the next kind of few hours afterwards? How do you judge whether it was good or not,
Yeah, well... Good question.
Do you ever feel that you nailed it, or?
I'd love to hear what you think about this as well, but I think that if you're evaluating it after you've given the sermon, what you're evaluating is the presentation of it the content you would have seen already beforehand, wouldn't you? And I think that you can tell sometimes, well, you should be able to tell about the content before you present it. And so I think that the way in which I think about after preaching and thinking about the how I reflect on it, it's, did I hit the beats that I wanted to hit? Did I communicate across what I wanted to communicate? And for that, I'm very dependent on looking at the Connect cards. I'm dependent on asking what some other people think. The only thing I really can tell is whether or not I presented the way that I hoped to be able to present. Does that resonate with you there?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think, I don't know. Sometimes I find it hard to judge whether a piece of content or an illustration or something I've written is actually going to be helpful or not. And you do get a sense of that in the moment as you're saying it, as you look around and you see people, or
yes.
Now obviously when you're doing it live stream, you don't get that feedback. But even as it comes out, sometimes if you've got a camera person or or if you've got other people in the room, sometimes even just the vibe that they give off can be helpful.
That's true. That's a very good point. It's a very good point. Yeah. And in this time when, at least the way we're doing it at church, I'm basically looking at this like one camera, and there's no one behind it. You can't really tell. I can't really tell. Yeah. So
I'm reading Charles Spurgeon's lectures to my students at the moment, and I was watching this John Piper video on Spurgeon, and he was saying that when Spurgeon spoke, he could lift his voice and speak to something like 20,000 people without a microphone.
Yeah.
In open air, and people could hear him. I'm sure there were plenty of good vibes back in his day when he was doing that. I feel like there's no bad vibes with open air preaching. If someone's open air preaching, generally the vibes are going to be good. That's my little theory.
Nice. There you go. I totally agree with you, by the way, about the, sometimes an illustration just falls flat when you give it, and there's people and their eyes just seem glazed over, or there's that furrowed brow and they look a bit confused. Although that being said, you know how some people, their concentrating face is a confused looking face, so you can't always tell exactly. Yes. But anyway, that was me. Thank you for asking. I appreciate that. And 25-28, landing the 25 minutes was not the main goal. The main goal was just to be shorter, so that, we got to respect people's attention spans online. And, you could go for 50 minutes, but if they only retain, 20 of it, then that's 30 minutes that, in one sense, is wasted. Not because what you're saying isn't helpful, but because it's not being communicated to people and they're not able to hear and retain what it is that you're saying. We don't preach for entertainment or performance. We preach for transformation. That people would meet and hear God's word. What about you, Pip? How have you been going this week?
Yeah, I've been going good. Submitted another assignment, which was good.
What was it on?
It was a doctorate assignment. It was a 1,000-word reflection on John Calvin's 3 chapters on providence in the Institutes. Just really, really enriching, and one of my thoughts reading through John Calvin's thinking about providence, he talks about the right Christian response to God's sovereignty, and he was saying, God wills, like in one action, God can will for God wills and man wills in the same action, and I don't want to get this mixed up, but it's kind of like, when someone wills for good, God might not be willing it at all. So I might will for something like someone not to get sick, and that comes from a good intention, but God might not will for that to happen, so the person will get sick. At the same time, I might will for something from bad motivations, like I want this person to get sick, so I'm going to poison their food or something. But at the same time, God wills that same event, but from God's good purposes. And so in the one event, there's, evil from me, but goodness from God, which I found very interesting to chew on. I think it's interesting, like he drills down into, he is very comprehensive in his use of the Bible. Whenever he talks about a topic, he looks at all different sorts of passages, and he brings up passages which seem to contradict the topic at hand. Like he talked about fate in Ecclesiastes in talking about providence. Interesting. But I feel like there are still questions that are left unanswered that he doesn't kind of tackle. Maybe it's just that in that section, but he doesn't address like where does evil originate. And yeah, the idea of, does God decide what man decides? Does God decide what people decide? That's another issue, I feel. But no, it's very good to just get a little dip the toes in the water of Calvin, and looking forward to reading more as the years go on.
Nice. Oh, there you go. It seems like it's quite a deep essay. Glad that it sounds really good that it was a reflection essay, trying to reflect on it rather than you trying to make your own case.
I Googled when did Calvin write the Institutes. He was 27 years old when he wrote the Institutes.
Yeah, that's right.
And here I am, like almost a 27-year-old, trying to write 1,000 words on the Institutes. And I'm like, what's going on? What's this guy doing? Go on. And then a guy that I was in the study hall with said, do you think if John Calvin had Netflix, YouTube, Facebook, would he be pumping out the Institutes? It'd probably be a pamphlet, wouldn't it?
That's a very good point. We fill our time with lots of different things to consume rather than produce, don't we? Yeah.
And it's I'm just thinking about this. Like these guys, they're so young. They see, because we've been talking about Mark Driscoll. These guys see no issue with like pumping out volumes of their own thoughts. Now, yes, it is in response to what's going on around them, like trying to reform the church and protesting against the Catholic Church and abuses and heresies and all this sort of thing. But even Augustine used to stay up until the early hours of the morning, and he wouldn't. He hired scribes, and he just kind of said stuff, and he got people to write it down. Kind of dictation software, except the software's people. I guess that is what a scribe is, isn't it?
Yeah. Did you know, Pip, that before dictation software, there were actually people who would write down what you were saying?
That's just seems like they should have just worked on the software.
Back in Augustine's day.
Anyway, I'm rambling.
Hey, actually, just worth asking, at college, do they call it Augustine or Augustine?
I don't know. Augustine. Tomato, potato. I don't know.
That's it. Yes.
Yeah. So no, it's been a good week and good to get that assignment done. So the next one's due in 1st of October, so I've got a bit of a break from due assessments. Other than that, went for a run the other day. Almost, It's getting harder and harder. You know?
That's right. Yes. I feel so unfit right now. I feel quite sedentary, even though I, try to move around a bit. Stretch, these are good things to do. Walk, that's a good thing to do. Anyway.
Do you use Strava like some of the other guys?
No, I don't. Should I get on that? Make lots of friends on Strava, compare how much we're walking.
You could do that. I mean, I've tried using Strava, but I can't be honest on Strava. The thing, like, I'll run my guts out, and then the comment, I'll post it, and the title will be leisurely afternoon jog.
Meanwhile, you're like on the verge of collapsing and passing out. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, nowadays, like, I've thought about using Strava, but I'm like, I don't want to post what I'm running and the pace I'm running. Like, it's just too embarrassing. So, yeah.
That's it. You know what? You and I should get on Strava, and then when we go for walks or runs, we should spell out Bible verses in the neighborhood.
Oh, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. I mean, it sounds like a lot of effort. I don't know how many... you get maybe a word out of me. You get maybe Jesus wept. I'd pick the...
yeah, go for that verse. Yeah, do it.
Yeah.
I love it. Anyway, speaking of, Bible verses, you and I should get into the Bible.
Sounds good. Let's do it. James, what have you been reading this week?
Well, following your choice, I have been reading John's Gospel this week. So I've been enjoying that. And I just wanted to point something out that really struck me this week, especially in light of the fact that, we've spent the last few weeks at St. Paul's in the book of Joel. I've really enjoyed being in the book of Joel, just immersing myself in the minor prophets, getting into the prophecies, the promises. Anyway, I was in John chapter 2 this week, and you've got the wedding at Cana. And so in John chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, Jesus is at this wedding, his mum's there, his disciples are there. Verse 3, when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." Now, I've heard multiple sermons on this. I think one of my favorite wedding sermons that I used to hear was on John 2, the wedding at Cana. And I've heard different explanations about this, but it struck me anew this time reading John chapter 2, having been in the book of Joel, because in the book of Joel and in the minor prophets, one of the curses that comes on the land is that the vines are devastated through the locusts. So the land is devastated, the fruit of the trees and the grass and the vines, they're just completely taken away by the locusts. And then in the promises of restoration, God promises that he will bring new wine to the people. At the end of Joel chapter 3, there's this promise of new wine as well. This idea that the mountains will sort of gush with new wine, which is a sign that the vines will be overflowing with fruitfulness again. It's a sign of the picture of restoration God is bringing. And so, having heard that, seen that, John chapter 2 makes so much more sense in terms of this reference that Mary goes to Jesus saying, "They have no more wine." Jesus says, "My hour has not yet come." And so I think that what's going on here is, there's this reference to the fact that in the restoration of the kingdom, which is what Jesus brings, the establishment of the kingdom, the restoration of God's people, he will bring new wine. But not yet, because his hour in John's gospel is referring to his hour of glorification, which is comprised of his death and resurrection, and his ascension is implicit in John's gospel as well. So I was just really struck reading this passage, and then he still does give them wine, and this wine is pointed out to be amazing, right? So verse 9, the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Jesus' glory, his hour has not yet come. This restoration, this fulfillment of the promises of the Old Testament. And yet even the wine that he produces now, that's not even the final wine, that new wine, is already better than anything that the people could produce themselves. And so, anyway, that really struck me this week, reading John chapter 2. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a great, you don't get this in other Gospels, this story. It's a great story. I wonder if there's any kind of symbolic significance of the jars that he uses, the ceremonial washing jars, and the fact that he fills them with water, they turn to wine, because in my mind there's lots of mixed imagery between wine and blood. And so I do wonder in what sense does this foreshadow Jesus, ultimate purification through his blood. I wonder if there's any connection to be made there. But yes, and also just people have pointed out the goodness of this story in showing Jesus, willingness to serve and desire to bring joy and bring life through what he's able to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, for sure. There's lots of dimensions to this passage. Aren't there? There's lots here. So, anyway, that's what I've been struck by again. Oh, and actually, just worth sharing that. And then the rest of John chapter 2 is this, reference about the temple and Jesus calling his own body the temple. That's also just so linked to Joel as well, where the end of the book, the triumphant victory of the book of Joel is God dwelling with his people. And Jesus here is God with his people, dwelling amongst them. And he himself is the temple. So, anyway, just so much here. And I think just a broader point, which I think our listeners can really benefit from, is seeing that, you can read the New Testament, and we should read the New Testament. We can understand a lot of what's going on here. But being able to go back and see all these images and themes from the Old Testament, it just accentuates our appreciation of the New Testament. Sort of like, you could watch a season or a series finale of a TV show, and you should be able to get, the general gist of what's happening and whatnot. That's fine. But the moments and the developments and the ending will not make as much sense or be as satisfying if you don't have all of that backstory.
I think that is so true. I even the concept of a Christ or a Messiah is a Jewish idea. You know what I mean? Every culture has the idea of what does it mean to go from the problem to the solution. But the idea of a Christ is a Jewish idea. And so, I do wonder, how did I become a Christian if I didn't really understand the Old Testament? Because when I became a Christian, I don't really think I understood the Old Testament properly. Or I understood it very superficially. I guess in a sense I still do, but even more so then. And so, I do wonder, is there something intrinsic in us that when we hear, Jesus died for your sin and rose again, that there is something in people, they understand what that means. or do you need the Old Testament scriptures to actually understand what that means?
Yeah. That's a really, really good point. And I think that on one level, some people don't want to wade into this. They don't want to. They just go, look, let me just try to tell you what you need to know. That's it. But you're missing a huge amount. I mean, and you can import any notions you want of what sacrifice could be, savior could be, God, who God is. And which could do a lot of damage to what it is that we believe. Anyway, just affirming what you were saying. I also, I became a Christian reading Luke's Gospel. Not much Old Testament knowledge myself. Does that mean that my conversion was not genuine because I didn't have a huge understanding of the Old Testament? No. All yours, right? Yours. Anyway, that's what I've been reading. Going to continue on in John's Gospel. Tonight at youth, we're finishing off the book of Titus, so looking forward to doing that with the youth as well.
Nice.
But Pip, what about you? What have you been reading in the Bible?
So I just finished Exodus. Looking forward to getting to Leviticus, but no, I just finished Exodus, and I just wanted to talk about the final chapter, God's glory filling the temple. So why don't we go to Exodus chapter 40? Exodus 40, and then towards the end. Now, I don't think I've got any profound insight here, but I just want us to imagine what it would have been like in this moment, and that the Israelites really did build a temple. They built a temple, and God's glory filled it, and just how profound that is, that God's glory filled the temple. What does that even mean? Anyway, let me read from verse I'll read from verse 33. Exodus chapter 40. Then Moses set up the courtyard around the tabernacle and altar and put up the curtain at the entrance to the courtyard. And so Moses finished the work. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. In all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the Israelites during all their travels. So, I said temple earlier, I guess like tabernacle's the right word to use, but so they finish the work, and the glory of the Lord fills it. A cloud descends on it, and fire is in the cloud at night. All this kind of like just imagery, but I think one thing I've been thinking about through reading Genesis and Exodus is there is this pattern of like creation and then filling. You get that in the Genesis account. The 6 days of creation, it's divided half and half into kind of creating and then filling. And even when God creates man and woman to multiply and fill and subdue the earth, but not only that, God creates man and fills man with his breath. And so creating and filling and creating and filling, and I guess even like the creation of the law in a sense is like a moral, like he's created the people of his people, and he's now filled them, given them a knowledge of his moral law. expressed, and now is created the tabernacle and has filled it. But I guess the question, like and in every single case, it is mysterious what it actually means. What does it mean for mankind to multiply and subdue the earth? Does that mean just to become widespread and populated? What does it mean for God's breath to be in us? What is spirit? What is soul? What are those categories? God's glory filling the tabernacle. To be honest, I don't really know what that means. The Israelites had a sense of what it meant and knew what it meant, but I feel like I still am wrestling with that, and I don't quite know what it means for God's glory. What is God's glory? I mean, we did see, we discussed last week about God's goodness, but expressed in terms of attributes and characteristics, moral characteristics, not physical characteristics. So, again, as I read through, I guess what I'm left with is a sense of awe, and not necessarily a clear picture of what it all means necessarily.
Yeah. I have a somewhat irreverent comment to make here, which is, did you hear about this church a few years ago that was trying to convince its members that they could summon the glory of God?
No, I didn't hear about that.
So what they basically did was they put smoke machines in the air conditioning vents, and they would put out like a puff of smoke, and they would fill it with gold glitter. And then during singing, the smoke cloud would come out, and they'd go, "Oh, it's the glory of God!" And people would be like, "Oh, it's amazing!" And then they would try to touch it, and they'd see, "Oh, I've got gold on my hands." So when you were saying, what is the glory of God? I was going,
the gold and the gold sprinkles.
That's right. The golden puff of smoke is assuredly what it is not.
Yeah.
And that's pretty insidious, isn't it?
No, I mean, yeah, totally. I mean, anything that's knowingly done performatively and manipulatively like that is pretty awful. But when I read the glory of the Lord filled the temple, somehow there is an image in my mind of some kind of wind or cloud or some kind of glow filling the temple.
Yes.
Filling the tabernacle. Yeah.
And I don't think that's wrong, because we do see the language of cloud here, don't we? Verse 34, that the cloud covered the tent of meeting, the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Verse 35, the cloud had settled on it. So there is this cloud idea. And also the brightness of it would make sense, because you think about verse 38, right? The cloud of the Lord was of the tabernacle by day, and the fire was in the cloud by night. So the cloud would have been, lit up. Yes. So I don't think it's wrong to have that sort of image in your head.
Yes. I mean, I guess there are two main options that I'm weighing up in my mind at the moment. Because as Christians, we think about the temple and we think about animal sacrifices. And I think we very quickly say, well, Jesus' death fulfills the ceremonial law, and so we can do away with that. But let's just hold on. There was a big period of history where for God's people, ceremony was key to their worship of God. Think about that, where we're actually physically going to the temple, physically killing animals, was a big part of their worship of God, as prescribed by God. And as a Christian living today, it seems weird. Weird on a couple levels. We wonder the mechanics of it. We wonder the motive of it. Why does God want that? We also wonder the cultural coincidence that other cultures did the exact same thing. and had temples and sacrificed animals. And so one option is that that's exactly right, and God did want that, all of that, and God did. God was in the temple, and God did kind of care. God was looking at the animal sacrifices and was kind of has this kind of spiritual economy of life and death. And another option is that all the ceremonial law was like him saying, my hand and my back and my face. It's anthropomorphic instruction to kind of to give people an idea of what God is like, to give people a sense of what God like. And so there is, is it possible that there, and what is the implication of that? Was God really in the temple or not?
Yes.
Was that something he wanted people to believe in order to have an effect on them, which was a right effect?
Yeah. I don't think you can get away from the fact that there is some sense in which God is in the temple, and God is in the tent, and he's in, filled the tabernacle. I mean, even think about, you just go one verse after this, Leviticus chapter 1, verse 1. You get, the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. One of the ways that I've sought to think a bit about this in terms of, like how this works. God is everywhere, and yet at times and places and in areas, God reveals himself more manifestly to his people. And so here, one way you could think about it is, is God amongst his people? Yes. But in terms of them being able to see him, to know his presence, that's what this is. It's him manifesting himself, his glory, his presence, in and amongst his people in the tabernacle, so that they could know his presence and see his presence and be guided by his presence, as we see here in Exodus 40, verse 38 as well. So what is the glory of the Lord? The glory of the Lord is God revealing himself more, so that the Israelites could perceive his presence. That's there. It's not that he's less present in other places, but he is revealing his presence more clearly to them.
Right. So I guess like a question then is his glory filling the tabernacle and later, the temple? Are we to think of that as like God's substance? Because from what I understand, God has no substance. He has no physical properties. Jesus is the first instance of God taking on particles, and yet God appeared as the burning bush,
Or the bush that appeared like it was burning but was not actually burning.
Yeah, sure, yes. And so the burning bush itself was not God. The cloud itself over the tabernacle is not God. Stop me if I say anything incorrect. I think
no. I think you're. I think we've got to be. We're pushing up against language here, aren't we? Because there's a sense in which they are identified. They are God, and yet to think that a bush could contain the presence of God, or a building, or a tent made with human hands could contain the presence of God. That's naive, right? And so, I think you're right. What you said a few minutes ago about it's language here that is being used to help us understand what's going on. Like, the nostrils of God, Exodus 15, the back of God, Exodus 34. And here, the cloud, the glory of God, like that is not, it's real because it really is God. And yet also it's pushing up against the limits of language here, because it's not as if God is only confined to the tent itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess like one thing I'm wrestling with is like, does God he condescends, you know, in the use of language, but does he also condescend in the instructions that he gives?
Yeah, right. I get you. So like meeting the people so that they can do things or see things or obey things that
Yeah.
otherwise they wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, like make the priestly garments of a particular sort, of gold, of purple, of, you know, could it be that has those instructions have absolutely zero spiritual effect at all in the heavenly realms or in God's mind, or you know, for sin they have no effect. The only effect they have is the impression, the effect that they have on the human heart, the person who actually receives the law and then does it. And that's the whole point of it.
Yeah.
In a sense, God gives those commands not because he cares necessarily about those things being done, but because he cares about the heart and how it's affected when it does it.
Yes and no. I think, I mean, yes, in the sense that Exodus 28, for example, like, you know, the priestly garments, it's interesting where he says, Exodus 28 verse 2, make sacred garments for your brother Aaron to give him dignity and honor. That's so, yes, in the sense that the reason that's given here in Exodus 28 is that it has a benefit for Aaron.
Right. Yes. So, but is it like read that verse again? Sorry.
Exodus 28 verse 2, make sacred garments for your brother Aaron to give him dignity and honor.
Right. But is that make sacred garments for your brother Aaron so that you will see him as more dignified and respectable, and the people will, and their hearts will be changed to revere him as their leader as they ought to? Or is it because objectively he'll have more reverence and honor by doing that, by having those garments?
I'm almost tempted to say, what's the difference?
Well, I maybe not in terms of the. I think sometimes when we read these verses, we think God cares about the color of the shirt. He doesn't, right?
Well, I'm going to say he does, because he commands what is good. He does.
Yeah, but
it's here in his good law.
But does he not? He cares about it because of what it achieves in the hearts of other people, not because he thinks gold is better than another color.
I get what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrestle with this.
No, I get you. I get what you're trying to say.
And if you follow that line of thought, it extends to other things like animal sacrifice. That when God says, sacrifice this sort of animal, one without blemish, it's not because when you sacrifice an animal with a blemish, God is like, oh, but that it forces the human to sacrifice something that's of value, of most value to them, the animal without blemish, and so it forces them it actually changes their heart and their relation with God.
No, I get that. I get what you're trying to say, and I think there's a degree of truth to that where you see it's the heart of the person who's doing it. One thing I do think we've got to be careful of, though, is not everything has a utility to it or an instrumental purpose to it. I mean, the goodness of creation is because it benefits humans, but it was good before humans, and it's good anyway. As in, the goodness of creation is that it declares the glory of God, not because every single aspect has a utility that can be beneficial to humans. If that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that in itself is a fascinating realm. I mean, it's like if someone claps, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? If
no, the answer is no. But anyway.
Yeah, well, if God created a great rock formation, which 13 billion years ago, 10 billion years ago, was not ever observed by any creature and has changed dramatically since then, did it in any way glorify God?
Yeah, I get you.
Or and I guess another question is, does God delight in these things, in any kind of aesthetic sense, separate from the emotional effect that they have on the human heart?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. You get a bunch of verses that lead us that way, but one that comes to mind for me is 1 Kings chapter 6, when he's talking to Solomon about how he needs to build the temple. I'm just trying to find the verse here, because there's a really, really interesting verse that that leads us in this way. I can't seem to find it right now, but essentially it's one of the reasons that's given for why something needs to be done the way it is for beauty. It's for the sake of beauty.
But for the sake of beauty, for whose sake? For God's sake or for people's sake?
Both, right? Because we get to enjoy God's creation. But I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, I think, well, things can be... I think the underlying assumption behind this way of thinking as well is the idea that if something is good, is it good for God or is it good for us? Or if something is true, or if something is beautiful, let's say, is it beautiful in God's sight or is it beautiful in our sight? But really, shouldn't we say that all of these things about what is good and true and beautiful, what we think of as good and true and beautiful, is always secondary to what God sees first as good and true and beautiful? That if something is beautiful for us, it's because it's beautiful for God. And so the right way we should think about this is that, well, in its first instance, does God see it as good? Does God see it as beautiful? And thus we would see it as good and beautiful, or should see it as good and beautiful as well.
Maybe. I'm not sure if I'm ready to actually agree with that. We see things as significant that God might not see as significant necessarily. For example, like I come back to the color of the shirt thing. Humans place significance in colors. Does God? Or is that an attribute that only that humans have in order to aid us to direct our affections to God? Does God give us certain attributes that He doesn't have as a what's the word? As a vehicle to aid our affection of God? Anyway.
No, well, I'm inclined to answer that by saying no. I think that there are things like color that God delights in it of Himself, without its utility that it has for us.
Yes, which if God has opinions about colors, that is blows my mind. You know? Not positively or negatively. It just is strange, is all I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's foreign to me in terms of what I think God cares about. But yeah.
I think we talked about this sometime last year about flowers. Do you remember that? We talked about whether God cares about flowers because of the flowers, or because of what the flowers could represent, or the value that you could bring to another person if you bring them a flower. Yeah, and I think that where we landed was, you could hear what I was saying about the value of flowers, but you're like, but I just can't really grasp that or understand that. You think you're still in the same place?
I think so. I think God could have had any kind of combination of atoms, or He could have created so many different things to demonstrate His love. So yeah, I don't know.
All good. No
anyway, interesting discussion. Hopefully listeners find it somewhat interesting as well. But Yeah. Shall we keep going on? Shall we do a guess who?
In just a moment, I found the verse. I found the verse about that I was referring to. Where is it? It's 2 Corinthians chapter... Sorry, not 2 Corinthians. 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles chapter 3. Chapter 3? 2 Chronicles chapter 3? Verse 6. Can you read that?
2 Chronicles chapter 3 verse 6?
Yes.
Pulled up.
Oh, actually, I just realized NIV translation is a bit different to the one that I remembered it being. But that's okay. Why don't you read it? 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 6.
Okay. It says, he adorned the temple with precious stones, and the gold he used was gold of Pavaim.
Yes, that's it. An older translation put it as, he garnished the house, or the temple, with stones, or with precious stones for beauty. Yeah. So, I don't really know how to read Hebrew, but this idea of adorning the temple, is the adornment of the temple for us, or is the adornment of the temple because it's God's house, God's place? Anyway, now I've just fired off a whole bunch of different thoughts in my head now.
Yeah, I mean, the idea, because if God exists outside of creation, and there was a time, creation, assuming creation is not eternally begotten of God, in the same way that the Son is eternally begotten of the Father, that there was a start in time. God's aesthetic taste, or would have existed beforehand, but how could it without any reference to physical things?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just another little thing.
Lots of thoughts there. Let's do Guess Who.
Let's do Guess Who.
And we'll finish up with Guess Who today.
Yeah.
Wow, we went for a long time talking about this. Is good, isn't it? We went pretty deep in this topic. And listeners, you'll see that we really don't prepare before we...
No. I was thinking, all right, James has shared, he's done a short one. I'll do a short one. We'll get on with it. But yeah.
Yes. All good. Well, listeners, it's time for us to play Guess Who. This week, Pip is guessing. And Pip, do you want medium or easy or hard mode today?
I want hard. If there was another, it's not super hard, but hard. If that makes sense.
Okay. Not super hard, but hard.
You know how Starbucks doesn't have a small? They have like a medium, a large, a grande, or whatever.
Yes.
I want the large. So rule out small. There's no easy. We don't do easy, unless you count Jesus from last week.
Yeah.
But
yeah. All right. That was, oh man, I have, my brain has been racked by my failure at Guess Who last week. It was good fun. Good work. Good work, Pip. Alrighty then. 20 questions. Guess Who? Playing along at home, listeners. Hopefully you are. Pip, let's do it.
Question number 1. Does this person's name get a mention in the Old Testament?
No.
Does this person's name get a mention in the New Testament?
Yes.
Okay, so this person has a name. Good deduction skills. All right. Is this person a male?
Yes.
Is this person mentioned in the Gospels?
No.
Is this person mentioned in Acts?
Yes.
Is this person mentioned in any of the letters of the New Testament?
I don't think so. No.
Ooh, okay, interesting. So we're thinking
6 questions.
Is this person a follower of Jesus?
Yes.
Is this person's conversion told in Acts?
No.
Is this person one of the 12 disciples, or one of the 13 disciples, or the original 12 plus Matthias?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Was this person part of the original 12 disciples?
No.
Oh, what is it, Matthias?
Yes.
Yes.
Good job.
Hey, nice. That was
good job.
That was good.
You narrowed it down well. Was that 10 questions?
Yeah, 10, 11, yep.
Good job. I was thinking, there's not a lot that we have here, so maybe that'll make it hard, but you got it.
No, that was good. I got lucky narrowing it down to the disciples. That was good.
Good job, Pip. Hey, question. How are you and Soph coping with lockdown right now?
Yeah, I think we're going pretty well at the moment. I think we're glad to have some of these assignments out of the way. I mean, in one sense, the assignments gave us fueled each day with a sense of like urgency and, got to get some stuff done. And now, there's not necessarily a sense of urgency, but I think we're kind of like, okay, well, now we're going to catch up on some of the work that we left to the wayside when we were doing our assignments. So, there's plenty to do. We're feeling good. We're also very aware of how blessed we are to be in the situation we're in lockdown. In terms of just relatively, we live a fairly comfortable life, and we have hobbies and we have TV shows, we have friends that we talk to, family that we talk to, and the ability to just study God's Word every day in depth and explore theology is awesome. So, doing well. What about you? What about you and Viv?
Yeah, we're doing well, thanks. We're doing really, really well. Zoom fatigue is real, and it's hard to work and study, as Viv is doing right now online. But we really can't complain, given we are doing well. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of sadness in thinking about not being able to hang out with family. That's been hard and saddening. But overall, we're doing well. We are watching TV right now, and I got games I can play to rest. So, going well.
Nice.
Anyway, thanks, Pip, for another week of the Bible Boys. We did a deep dive into a big topic this week. Who knows what next week could bring?
That's right. Looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
See ya. But that was you. There you go. So James's House of Corn.
Jamie's Corn House.
Jamie's Corn House.
But no, yes, it was a Year 9 project. I was like, what do I put in? What do I put in here? I was thinking about making a new ad, but then I went, no, I'll just put this in. I'm sure it'll be funny. Anyway. All right, let's start.
Okay.